Welcome to Portfolio Africa, a show where we present deal makers, creators, and leaders from the private and public sectors that are working to transform Africa to share highlights from their work. I am Kemi Oshukoya, the host. Data is the new gold. Just ask any economics, business leader, and policymaker, and they will tell you that data collection is the not-so-secret ingredient in economic science that can help countries, businesses, governments improve their revenue as well as services to their public. Yet, many countries, governments in certain parts of the world still lag behind in data collection, resulting in poor services to their citizens, as well as creating a loophole for tax avoidance by businesses and citizens. At a recent IMF World Bank meeting in October, the group of G24 countries discussed plans to curb tax avoidance by multinational businesses and hold them accountable to pay their taxes in emerging markets and developing countries where they do business. I spoke with the chairman and the director of the G24 after the press conference.
They are looking to safe havens or the places where that taxes are lower. So first they should pay more taxes globally. Then there's the issue of how they should be apportioned between the countries. And it's not so easy because the money that you are taking on taxes in one country means less money for the other country. So to reach an agreement is not so easy.
Okay.
So you can probably have some ideas, some standards, but very easy. People talk with any minister of finance and they want more money. So they don't want their money to go to our country. They want their money to stay in the country. No? So it's hard to reach an agreement. No? Thank you.
So can you talk about taxation and how that can improve domestic and international revenue?
Well, our discussions today, and for quite some time actually, is how there could be much more international tax cooperation and taxes, because companies, they cross borders. They're everywhere, and oftentimes what they don't pay in one country, it means it's taken from another country. And so what is happening now in the OECD is to, at least for the particular case of the digital economy, is to talk about a standard for all, or at least a set of rules that could guide the taxation of digital activities. And that's probably broader than what we normally call as digital companies. And so if that succeeds and it's implemented, there would be some standard for all to adopt. And hopefully that would at least curtail what I would call, or reduce, or curtail the tax avoidance that's been happening right now. Quite a lot of tax avoidance that's happening right now that's legal, but it really is inimical to grow to tax revenues in countries, particularly in developing countries, which are disproportionately affected.
Okay, and do you see this putting in this rule also helping digital economic, fintech, for example? Mm-hmm. How do you see that impacting?
Well, fintech has provided quite a lot of opportunities, in terms of financial inclusion. We have a good partnership with the Group of 24, with the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, of which fintech is a major, area of emphasis. And so there are opportunities for fintech, and the issue is what do you do to manage the risks? And one doesn't always know what kind of risks would go out there. And so one has to bring in regulators to be aware of the opportunities of fintech, but also find a way to address the risks so that you don't give up the opportunities. And so, and that's one of the, I think, challenges is for countries. Kenya and others.
And Nigeria,
etc.
And Cote d'Ivoire. Yeah, exactly. A lot of African countries are looking into that aspect.
Mobile telephones have really had a great penetration. And I do think there are benefits to be had, of even delivery of services, public services through cell phones, and it's not but I mean the use of mobile infrastructure. So it's really important for the world to come together and for countries to be able to figure out how to regulate them, because there will be some of that. It's a financial sector and in the first place, but to find a way that would make sure that the opportunities are realized as well, because that's really where the big gains are. We know that technology, mobile technology, offers opportunities for much more efficient delivery of services, and for fintech, there's been quite a lot of effort to see that, for example, that how do you say, services, social services, and money, social transfers could be done through a fintech framework. And I do think that that's one of the areas where there's quite a big gain for reaching people, and at least what we have found out as probably, I should say, maybe data, but actually it's the individual ID, which would facilitate, the use and, how do you say, the use of fintech, because you would have an identification.
Okay. What is the role of data and data collection in global trade and global market? And how do data impact trade policies such as tariff, revenue optimization? For answers, I spoke with two research economists at the International Monetary Fund office in Washington, D.C. You just finished talking about bilateral trade and now tariff and how that impacts the global market. But you did not talk about very much about Africa. Why is that?
Yeah, our analysis was quite constrained to the extent we could incorporate African countries, because the data is very limited, and we combine very sophisticated and various sets of data. So African countries have unfortunately not played a big role in our results. Having said this, one could imagine that the African, especially industrialized African countries, are similarly affected than other countries. So again, to a certain extent, they could be affected through the value chain, so through either lower demand because of lower trades or lower demand for their output. That could be one channel, or to a certain extent, they could also, to more marginally maybe, be affected for higher input costs given the additional tariffs, especially if these would spread further. Finally, there's also the possibility that there's some benefits through trade diversion. That would mean that exports that would previously come from a country that is now confronted with a higher tariff, say China, to the US, that these exports could be replaced by imports from African countries. But that would, of course, require a relatively sophisticated industrial structure.
Okay, so I mean, much of your work depends on data, and as you mentioned earlier on, that because there isn't a lot of data coming out of Africa, that impacts you not being able to look at what is going on that continent. So how important it is for African leaders to make sure they invest, because as we know, we live in a global world and in a global market. And if African countries are being excluded from study like yours because there isn't much data, so how important it is for leaders and to invest more in collecting data about the market, about that we help.
So
Data.
generally, I think data collection is very important, particularly for economic analysis. Our study is constrained because it's based on historical data. We're combining a number of different data sets that have different country and time period coverage. So our hands are really tied to that. But of course, more data is better from the perspective of economic analysis.
Maybe just one word here to add. I think we were particularly fortunate that we could find a data set that is also internationally coherent.
Okay.
And I think that's particularly for a work like ours that is extremely useful, so that the data is exactly the same coming out of different countries, which of course is another additional step. So it's not only the collection of the data, but it's also making the data eventually consistent across countries.
Okay.